All right, well, thank you all for joining me this morning. My name is Elise Sprunk, and I'm an occupational therapist at Kinetic Edge Physical Therapy. We have several locations in central Iowa and provide occupational therapy in 5 of those locations, including Pella, Oskaloosa, Newton, Ames, and Des Moines. And we have just a passion and heart for helping families and kids and teachers provide children with the best opportunity for learning and growing and behaving and doing all of the things that a child needs to be able to do, playing. And so I'm excited about this morning. The one thing I would change is me not being able to see you. And so I missed that interaction. So I welcome questions during the presentation, and you can do that by posting those in the chat, and that pops up and I'm able to see that. Otherwise, there will be a time at the end for answering questions as well. And I know I did get a couple emailed questions from people who are going to be sitting in today. So I will address those during the presentation when it seems appropriate. So anyway, we will get started here on learning how to create a sensory-friendly learning environment. This diagram is fairly old, but it's one that I still love to show. It just really reiterates the importance of our sensory system in the foundation of a person's development. So if we were going to look at a child's development like a pyramid, academic learning would be up there at the top, followed closely behind with behavior and daily living activities. So dressing, bathing, grooming, hygiene, eating, those types of things. All of those skills require a pretty high level of cognition and ability to problem solve and reason and demonstrate executive functioning. And so that's really where we hope our child succeeds and is striving. Below that are all sorts of perceptual motor and sensory motor development skills. So using the 2 sides of the body together, maintaining posture, understanding our body awareness, eye-hand coordination, fine and gross motor coordination, motor planning. You can see all of the different bricks in the middle there. At the very bottom then is our sensory system. I would also move that reflex maturity, which is in the center of the pyramid, to the bottom, and several other clinicians and researchers have also moved back there. Today's focus is going to be on the sensory system, but at Kinetic Edge, we also focus a lot on that reflex maturity as the foundation of our development. So you can just see that our sensory system and how we process that is very fundamental to the rest of our development. So we look at 8 main sensory or 8 sensory systems. Those top 5 are the ones that are most known. And if you're an elementary teacher, you probably teach those in your classrooms. And so they are quite familiar to us. The bottom 3 are a bit more unfamiliar. So we have movement or vestibular, body position and proprioception, and interoception. So movement vestibular is our brain's ability to know where our head is positioned in space. And so it has a lot to do with whether we're moving in a linear or straight pattern, whether we're moving in diagonal patterns, maybe we're spinning, maybe we're hanging upside down. A lot of our auditory and our visual system develops through our movement system. In fact, there have been some research studies out there that have shown that when a child is moving, their language center of their brain is firing better. And so really looking at telling a child to sit still and pay attention or sit still and listen isn't probably even as effective, or a child might not even be able to do that if they are really trying to listen, but they also need that movement. Body position or proprioception is our brain's ability to know where the rest of our body is in space or relationship to others. It also guides a child in knowing how much force to use when they are writing or when they're playing with somebody else. It guides their ability to know how hard to throw a ball if they're playing reciprocally with another child. And so it's a very important sense for social skills, learning, coordination. And then the last one there is interoception. So interoception is our body's ability to know how we feel internally. So our ability to sense whether or not we need to go to the bathroom, how hot or cold we are, whether or not we're hungry. And so it's that internal thermostat. Again, a very important sensory system. So what is sensory processing? And sorry, I've got a little eyelash or something. Speaking of sensory system, right? Tactile, being distracted here by my tactile system. So what is sensory processing? It really is just the everyday neurological procedure of organizing the information we take in from our bodies and the world around us and use it for daily life. So this occurs constantly throughout our day, very, very quickly. We make decisions based on what's happening around us. So as you are sitting there listening to this webinar, you are making decisions about how well you're going to be paying attention based on, how does the chair feel? How, what does the environment smell like? How does, the inside of your mouth taste? What is the lighting like? Are you able to hear me well? Are there other sounds in the environment that are maybe distracting you? And so that is sensory processing. So you are making the decision and ability to attend based on what's happening around you. So what is sensory processing disorder? I often like to say difficulties. Sensory processing, sometimes we just have strong preferences, but that can result in three main ways. Either, the brain does not receive or detect the messages coming to it. So it's just not picking up the signals like it should be, or the brain is inefficient in doing something with those signals. So maybe it's not organizing the signals. Maybe it's not discriminating between two different signals. Modulation is something we'll talk about in a little bit. But it's that processing in the brain. And then the third thing that can happen is that the brain sends out inaccurate messages to direct the child's actions. So, perhaps the child sees the curb, their brain processes how high their foot needs to step to get up onto the curb, but the brain then sends out an inaccurate message to guide the foot, and now they trip and fall. So those are kind of the three things that need to occur for smooth sensory processing. So when we look at children in the clinic, we have parents complete a sensory profile, which just gives us more information about how the child is processing their sensory information. And so these are the four areas that we will see, and we're going to talk about all four of those. It's important to keep in mind that all of us are somewhere on a continuum of either needing a lot of sensory information in order to respond to it. That would be a high threshold, or we might have a low threshold, meaning it does not take much for us to notice sensory input and make a decision on it. So we are all somewhere on there on that spectrum. And then we are either going to be actively involved in pursuing the sensory input, or passively involved in in processing that sensory information. So let's look at these four. And really, I just wanted to include this information because I think it's going to help you, understand better those students and kids that you are engaging with. So the avoider probably, along with the sensory seeker, are the two that have the most behavioral issues. So the avoider has a low threshold. It doesn't take much for these kids to have that sensory threshold met. And when that sensory threshold is getting met, it can be uncomfortable or frightening. So these kids often will have the emotional outbursts to get out of a situation. This is these kids are the ones, when you think of like a sensory meltdown, they are probably avoiders, or they might withdraw. So those students who crawl under desks to get out of a situation. Sometimes we talk about eloping, the kids who run. So in general, they are resistant to change. They really like routine and things to be very much the same. And so our goal with these children is to limit the unfamiliar input and broaden that sensory, that bubble of acceptable sensory experiences, so that eventually not everything seems so new and novel and frightening for the child. So the registration bystander has a high neurological threshold. These students are often not a behavioral issue because they are passively responding to what's going on around them. So oftentimes they may appear like they have low energy, or they're really tired. They may appear kind of apathetic or bored. They need a lot of sensory stimulation. And if there isn't enough, they are just going to kind of let things go over their head. And what I've noticed over this years that I've been doing this is that the registration bystander kids oftentimes get missed until the middle elementary years. And I think that that's because prior to that, people have compensated for them. So, these kids might be ones who, if you tell them to get their math book out and turn to page 86 and start on problem 3, they're kind of looking around to see, what are my friends doing? What book are they getting out? Where am I supposed to be turning it to? What am I supposed to be doing? Because it was just an auditory cue and it wasn't enough of a stimulation to their brain. So, prior to that, you maybe as a teacher would just walk over and open the book up for them and kind of point to where they needed to be. And then as you're expecting them to be more independent, we start to notice like, I think maybe they aren't able to follow those instructions. And then the sensitivity seeker. So these kids, again, have that high threshold, just like the bystanders, but they are going to be actively pursuing that sensory input. So these kids are always engaging, very fidgety, excitable. They might be the ones who are pushing other kids in the line. They grow up to be adults who want to go skydiving and hang gliding and mountain climbing and all of the things. They need additional sensory input. And so sometimes they will go and get that in ways that maybe aren't appropriate in the classroom and just are more bothersome to people around them. So with them, we want to provide additional sensory input in acceptable ways so that they can pay attention and participate while doing appropriate things. So, and then the last one is the sensitivity sensor. These children, like the avoiders, have that low threshold. So it doesn't take much for them to notice the sensory input. However, they're passive. So they aren't having meltdowns and withdrawing, but they are very distractible. They might be hyperactive. They are going to draw their attention to the newest thing that happens around them. And so they may be working real well on individual seat work, and then somebody gets up or drops a pencil, and now all of a sudden their attention is drawn away from what they're doing, and it is drawn to whatever just happened. And so with these kids, we want to support that sensory threshold, and provide them with opportunities to maybe lessen some of that sensory input so that they can continue with their task, and continue to be focused. So modulation is our brain's ability to either ramp something up for us so that we pay attention to it, or dampen it so that we don't. So, for example, perhaps, an extreme example would be a fire truck drives by your classroom with the sirens, and some of the kids are going to completely stop what they're doing, get up, go look out the window, check that out. It may take 10 minutes to get them back doing what they were doing before. Whereas some kids are going to hear that, oh, that's a fire truck. I've heard that sound before. Their brain, will put the image of the fire truck in there, and they don't necessarily need to go to the window to see it. And they can keep working on what they need to be working on. So we oftentimes will talk about self-regulation. So self-regulation is our brain's ability to maintain, attain, maintain, or change our level of arousal appropriately for a task or situation. So, this is our brain's ability to either help us attend to something or calm us down if we need to be calmed. And when we work on self-regulation with children in the clinic, we acknowledge that there are a lot of things that assist us in maintaining that appropriate arousal level. And it really doesn't have to do with us just telling ourselves to stay alert or to calm down, but we use our sensory system to do that. And so, there are different things that we do that affect our brain's ability to be alert and focused. If I am driving home late at night and I have 45 minutes more to go on my drive, I am not going to just tell myself over and over and over again to stay alert, be focused, pay attention, but I am probably going to make sure that I have a crunchy, salty snack, or maybe some gum or a Diet Coke, all things for my mouth that are going to help me stay alert and focused. Or I might, have a different, preferred radio station, either music or maybe talk radio, depending on my preferences, that is going to help me. I might, turn the air conditioning up higher. I might get out and walk around. Those are all sensory things that I'm doing in order to stay alert and focused. The same is true for calming myself down. If I have, had a stressful day and I come home and, somebody says to me, oh, it'll be fine, just calm down. That's not probably going to be that effective. But, maybe I go for a walk or take a shower or, have dinner. Again, all sensory things that are releasing endorphins to my brain that are going to help me calm down, and then be able to rationalize why, maybe it wasn't as big of a deal as what I thought. So this arousal alert theory is kind of the basis for the strategies that we're going to talk about for your classroom. So this handout is one of my favorites. So we're going to spend a little bit of time here. If you want this handout bigger, you'll see at the end my email address, or you'll be getting a link for the presentation, and I'm happy to send this one out. But so the sensory motor planning worksheet is from the curriculum, How Does Your Engine Run? It was developed by Patricia Otter, who is an occupational therapist, and it's based off of studying the brain. And so if we look at the screen here on the top left-hand side of the screen, you're going to see taste and smell and oral texture. Those sensory experiences are the easiest for our brains to process. So when something is easy for us, we can draw the conclusion that it's going to be calming. So we know that taste and smell and oral are the most calming sensory experiences for our brain. And if you think back to infancy, these are the first ways that we really teach children how to regulate. We give them something to suck on, and it's calming for them. So as we go across to the right side of the screen, the sensory experiences become more difficult for our brains to process, therefore it becomes more alerting. So you can see way over on the right-hand side, visual and auditory are going to be the most alerting sensory experiences for us. And if you think about your students, where are they spending a lot of their time? In visual and auditory. And so, their brains are going to be pretty stimulated and pretty tired by the end of the day. And I think as adults, we would all agree that, if we go to continuing education or a conference and listen and look all day long and don't have a lot of movement, perhaps we get home from that and asking us to do more cognitive tasks, balancing our checkbook or, figuring out our taxes or, something like that might be considered overstimulating, but we could mow the yard or go for a walk or do something physical and tolerate that just fine. So those three sensory categories there in the middle, tactile, vestibular movement, and vestibular gravity, are considered, organizing for our brains. And so when we think about organizing, we think about things that are going to, again, assist us in that arousal level. So whether it's staying alert and focused or being calm, those three are always a good go-to. So if you see joint and muscle activity, that's going to be a relatively fairly, calming activity. Joint, deep pressure, moderate temperatures, again, pretty calming. Because as we go down these columns, we go from calming or easy for our brains to process to the bottom is going to be much more alerting or difficult. And so the middle two rows, starting with salt and biting, crunching, and sour, citrus, and chewing, and going across, are again going to be organizing. And so I, always recommend, if in doubt, go to the organizing activities or the mouth to assist kids in calming or being alert and focused. So you can see there in the very center of the chart is bouncing and swinging. Excellent, excellent movement activities for kids. And oftentimes we'll see them being able to be alert and focused. Spinning down there at the bottom, rotary movement, can be really good for our seekers who need movement. Unfortunately, a lot of playgrounds have gotten rid of merry-go-rounds and that type of thing, but hopefully you still have some options for spinning because some kids do need that movement. I think the other important thing to note here is language is in the bottom right corner. And so that is the most difficult sensory experience for our brains to process. So again, if you have a 2-year-old who's having a tantrum or a meltdown, we've all experienced our adult nature wants to try and talk them out of that, right? And it's never, I hate using the word never, but probably never effective to try and talk a 2-year-old out of a temper tantrum. But, if we go back to what we did when they were infants, we would give them something to suck on. We would provide joint muscle, deep pressure through swaddling. We would probably bounce them or rock them, giving them some movement. And then we would use some vibration sounds such as shh to help them calm down. And so, really kind of going back to some of that and thinking about helping those kids de-escalate. Those can be some helpful techniques. At the bottom of this, you'll see, the ways we can change the variables. So, we all probably have met a child who could jump on a trampoline forever, but we don't have forever for them to jump on the trampoline. And so, schools don't maybe have trampolines, although you might have one if you are, have a sensory room or something like that, but they still can't be there forever. And so, we can change the variables of that jumping activity by either, making it available to them more frequently throughout the day. So you would change the frequency of the input. Maybe we change the intensity. So we tell the child, I want you to jump as high as you can for 2 minutes. So now we've increased the intensity. Or maybe we change the rhythm. So now you're jumping big, big, little, big, big, little. So we're changing up the rhythm. And a lot of our sensory activities can be changed through these different variables. So even, providing a child some gum to chew on, or maybe a chewy necklace. We probably don't want them chewing all day long. I don't think that would be good for their jaws or for their teeth. So, what can we do to change the variables? Well, maybe we give them a bigger piece of gum or a more rigid chewy necklace. So now we've changed the intensity. Or maybe we give them, gum or a chewy necklace for short periods of time at different times throughout the day. So we've changed the frequency. So again, we're going to go into more specific strategies in the next slides, but I want you to kind of keep this chart in mind as you look at those, because I think it's, again, just really helpful for the foundation of what we're trying to do. Because obviously the other, elephant in the room that I haven't mentioned is the fact that if you're a classroom teacher, you've got kids with all sorts of different sensory preferences. And so how do you manage that, right? How do we provide the seekers with what they need and the avoiders with what they need, and that kind of thing. Fortunately, you've got probably more kids than not who just naturally gravitate and are getting the sensory input that they need. It's those kids who maybe aren't getting that naturally or don't know how to do that, who are going to need more of your attention and guidance really in that regulation process. So, all right, so the next few slides are just, remember I talked about the middle 3 columns and the middle 2 rows of this chart. So as being organizing. So we're just going to break that down a little bit for your classroom settings. So, when we look at organizing, this is really the place if you're having trouble identifying, whether the child is an avoider or a seeker, or, what can we do for our whole entire classroom? These are some things that are just in general going to be good input for, a lot of your kids. Again, I'm not going to say all, but so limiting extraneous auditory input. So, sometimes it's nice to have music playing, and you'll be able to tell which kids can't handle that, and maybe they get noise canceling headphones or something like that. But in general, if you're starting to see an over arousal, you would want to limit that auditory input that isn't necessary. So maybe a little while ago you could hear that the air conditioning kicked on in the room I'm in, and it just takes a little extra concentration to be able to continue to attend and that type of thing. Well, here it goes. Speaking of, so limiting that as much as you can. Reducing the loud or surprise factor. So this would have to do with classroom bells, that type of thing. And when those are coming. So for those kids who can't handle that, even just giving them a heads up, like, oh, the bell's going to ring here in 10 seconds. And that way they can cover their ears and avoid that surprise factor. Guiding kids to, the jumping movements Linear movement would be like swinging. So guiding kids to that, those kids that you know out at recess would really benefit from that. Making those suggestions to them. Obviously, you can't, force them to do what they need to, but especially for those kids who you notice are kind of just loafing around the playground, aren't, climbing and sliding and swinging and that type of thing, trying to encourage them with those types of movements. Oral input, for organization, again, you're going to look at salty, crunchy snacks. So if you're a school where kids can bring a snack for recess, making that suggestion to these parents. So crunchy apples, pretzels, those types of healthy, crunchy snacks. And then also looking at, either spicy or minty, chewy gum is going to be more organizing for a child. And then deep, firm pressure touch. So tickling and light touch actually travel to the brain in the same pathway as pain. And so avoiding light pressure touch, but providing deep, firm pressure touch. So, if you were going to put your hand on a child's shoulder while giving them a little one-on-one instruction, making sure that that pressure touch is a deep and firm touch. Additional ones, outlining the schedule for the day, that can be very beneficial. And I think most classrooms do that, discussing unexpected events before they happen so that everybody's, warned prior to those transitions. So, extra assemblies, those types of things. Limiting extraneous visual material. So I once heard an educator give a presentation on bulletin boards and classroom visual material, really making sure that you don't have too much visual stimulation. I mean, obviously you want to include those bulletin boards and visual information that's essential for learning and what they need, but if it's extra, maybe hanging up artwork out in the hallway if that's allowed, instead of hanging all of that up in your classroom, but just limiting how much of that visual material you have. And then you can also do that by having things in cubbies, class folders, planners, and working with visual schedules with those older kids is going to be very helpful. Providing maybe a quiet corner in your room if you have the space. It's not necessarily for timeouts, but it's when kids need to just get away so that they can have that space. Breathing activities are extremely important. We're going to talk about those in a little more detail coming up here. And then anytime you can get joint and muscle activation, so wall push-ups, chair push-ups. Chair push-ups are just where they're going to put their hands on their chair and lift their bottoms up off of the chair. You get a lot of good joint and muscle activity through the arms that way. And nobody, this is a great quick one if you're not wanting, all 20 some students to get out of their chairs and have to, that can take longer than what you think, right? So this way you can add that just right there at their chair. Hand fidgets can be a really good thing, or they can be bothersome. So, making sure that the hand fidget is quiet so that it doesn't bother other people. And I'll show you like a technique here in a few minutes, just something they can do with their own fingers. Providing movement breaks, brain breaks, any type of movement that crosses midline is going to be really organizing. And movement that involves joint and muscle activity. So, animal walks can be really helpful. Jumping in place can be helpful. And then palm squeezes. So, just even placing, having your students place their other thumb in the middle of their palm and press that. This is called our Babkin spot. It's a reflex integration technique, again, which can assist with calming. And so doing some of those can be very helpful. So we're going to kind of go through each specific sensory category now. I think I get a lot of referrals. Oh, I got a question here. Let me go to that. Do you have suggestions of what could be used in the quiet space to help students move from their zone to another zone of regulation? So yeah, I think looking at those charts, I mean, some of that is going to be specific to that student, but if you have something that they could use for their mouth, I know that gets a little tricky, but if they're allowed to have water bottles in the classroom, letting them have their water bottle in that quiet space, providing some, maybe like the little visual tubes that have, kind of the glitter and oil that run down. So, there's different variations of those. Some of them just have the oil and water and glitter, but some of them also are more like an I Spy type vision tube that can be helpful from a visual standpoint. Maybe you have some cards in there of movement cards. So they're doing maybe, some finger munchies that I'm going to show you here in a little bit, or if you have cards that, push-ups, sit-ups, those types of things for movement. Maybe you give them, just some noise canceling headphones. So, really to quiet it down, or white noise, or, calming music. But you're going to, maybe have like a basket of some different options for them. So great question. So oral movements, oftentimes we get referrals for kids who are maybe chewing on their shirts, eating pencils, their tongues are hanging out when they're concentrating. You can see that on some of these pictures here. And what that's really telling us, it's a communication that, this is a difficult task, and they're trying to pull their central nervous system in to assist with the task. And so, I often we work on replacing with an appropriate oral strategy. There are also some reflexes that are associated with some of that oral input. And so again, that would, reaching out to an occupational therapist who works with reflex integration could be an important step with that too. But so looking at some oral, sorry, my slide's not moving. Here we go. Some oral activities that can enhance their arousal. So again, if you are allowed to have them have water bottles, especially with straws. So I listed there the Camelback water bottle. I love that one because it has a nice big mouthpiece and they can bite and suck at the same time. So that can be really helpful. If you have times in your day that they're allowed to chew gum, that would be good. I listed cotton ball math or different activities, learning activities where straws and blowing can be used, because you'll remember possibly at the top of that left corner of that sensory motor planning worksheet I showed you, blowing is a calming activity. So if you can include that, I know that there can be concerns about germs and that type of thing. So that's really, something that you need to look into with your classroom. And then some kids will benefit from like a chewy necklace or something to appropriately chew on instead of using their shirt. And so looking at those options. Breathing activities, doing breathing activities as a whole class. So there's, even doing like the one where you inhale up the thumb and they're tracing. So they inhale and then exhale and then inhale and exhale, and you're just having them use the other hand to go up and down those fingers. I like that one for classrooms. There's other handouts that you can have on the desk that guide kids through breathing activities. Breathing sounds like it should just be happening all the time, but I think there's a lot of kids who aren't getting good breath exchange, and we all know what that does to our brains and learning. So guiding kids through some of those breathing activities could be really good, and making sure that they understand that they're going to breathe in through their nose. So they're going to smell, their favorite treat, and then they're going to blow out birthday candles, so that they're getting good inhale and exhale. Mouth breathing seems to be a problem at times. And so trying to help kids when you're doing your breathing activities to make sure that they're getting good breath. Tactile activities. So sometimes we have kids who struggle because of clothing preferences. And so, compression clothing can be really helpful. I do feel like, in the 20 some years I've been doing this, clothing has changed a lot, and comfortable clothing is much more acceptable. And kids are wearing, clothing that just naturally provides deep pressure for them. So that can be helpful. Hand fidgets, I talked a little bit about. Again, they shouldn't be toys. And they, if they can be quiet, that would be preferred. One of the things I love to teach kids is little finger, we call them finger munchies. And so they're going to have a little alligator here, and you're going to just squeeze down the finger and then pull off. And you're going to repeat each finger 1 to 3 times, and then go to the next finger and pull off. This is actually included in some of the reflex integration work that we use. But I've had a lot of kids come back and tell me, like, I did my finger munchies during my Christmas concert and it helped me, be calm. Or, it's something that's quiet and they always have their fingers. So teaching kids the finger munchies, I think, can be a helpful classroom strategy. Again, thinking about what type of touch are you providing? Is it deep and firm and predictable? That's going to be better than light, ticklish, and unpredictable. Sometimes you can provide textures on a desk, putting Velcro or different textures on the bottom of a desk so a child can rub that if they are seeking out touch in other ways, like touching their classmates. That would be a good way to replace that behavior. Sometimes pencil grips will have different textures on them, so those can be used to provide extra sensory input. And then figure eights is, again, another tactile touch technique that is related more to the reflex integration side of things. But if a child is upset and you would naturally be inclined to just rub their back, instead of just rubbing up and down, you're going to do an 8 pattern on their back. So you're crossing their spine, you're stimulating both sides of the brain. It should be a deep pressure touch, but you're just doing those 8s on their back for hopefully a little bit bigger bang for your buck. So proprioception activities. So these are really considered like heavy work, deep pressure. And so again, this is just good endorphin release to the brain. And so it is going to be very helpful for especially the calming side of things. And so heavy work, thinking about little jobs in your classroom that a child can be involved in, whether it's, putting chairs up on the desk or wiping down the whiteboard. Sometimes we'll have backpacks loaded with books for a pretend assignment to bring those, down the hallway to another classroom or to the office, just to give them some of that heavy work. Holding the door open, pulling the door open for the kids coming in and out of recess. All of those would be good heavy work activities. Deep pressure, so even having kids give self hugs can be nice, put their hands on their shoulders and just squeeze. Stretching, so we also get good endorphin release when we stretch our joints. It's why yoga can be and stretching or just regulating in general. So, guiding kids through some body stretches. And then also using like the exercise band You've probably seen that used on the chair legs for kids who just need a little extra input, who are maybe moving all over the place. That can be helpful. And then push-ups. I mentioned chair push-ups a little while ago, but also doing wall push-ups, those types of things. Maybe you're waiting in line out in the hallway, and you could incorporate some wall push-ups while you're waiting. Helps kids keep their hands to themselves, and gives them some of that endorphin release. So balance and movement activities. Lots and lots of different things. Obviously, finding the ones that work the best in your classroom are going to be the most beneficial. I think, in the last few years, we've heard a lot about flexible seating options, which can be awesome, and just give kids some different options. So like using the move and sit cushions that may be available to you if you don't have those available, and they can be kind of spendy. Using a $1 beach ball and putting just a little bit of air in it can do somewhat the same thing as the move and sit cushions. Doing a tea stool is just like has one leg and then a little seat on it. So gives kids kind of that sense of moving, another different seating option. Jumping, rolling, swinging, rocking, spinning. Obviously, you can't do all of those in the classroom, but if you're doing group activities, or if you have some say or guidance in what they're doing at recess, or talk to like the recess monitor, trying to get some of those kids on the swings. Animal walks are awesome. They get the head into some different positions. So again, you're getting some different brain stimulation there. So, bear walks. I love the flamingo here in the clinic. Kiddo is going to stand on one foot for 5 seconds and then hop to the other foot and stabilize for 5 seconds. So there's that. Obviously, crab walks, and letting kids kind of make up their own animal walks. I've learned some good ones that way. Superman position is just lying down on the floor and lifting arms and legs up off of the floor. And then doing arm circles, leg circles, body circles, so they're just, like getting some different movement in that way. These are just a few of the ideas. But again, working on what can be used in the classroom to be helpful. And then looking at vision. Really thinking about your space. And how crowded is it? Is there, the space for the quiet corner? Looking at where kids are seated. So, the kids who are more easily distracted, having them seated up more toward the front. Thinking about what colors and lighting you have, giving options if you have windows to just have natural lighting at times. And turning off the fluorescent lights. Removing some of the visual information from a paper. I, most often think about this with like math worksheets, even for reading, like it can be fairly overwhelming for some kids when there's that much visual information. So, using other papers to hide some of it, or like for math homework, cutting out a box so that they're just looking at the one particular problem at a time, so they can stay focused on that, using bookmarks, that type of thing, for removing some of that visual information. I Spy and word searches. So the previous question about what could be included in the quiet corner. So I Spy books are great. Those types of things that are, challenging the child, but hopefully not overstimulating. Auditory activities. So again, considering what music you use. So if you want the music to be calming, 50 to 70 beats per minute would be considered calming, because it would match the child's heart rate. And so using that, sometimes metronomes can be really helpful and calming. Like I'll even use metronomes sometimes when a child is having difficulty with like a balance beam activity. And again, keeping that metronome at the 50 to 70 beats per minute. Fortunately, nowadays, metronomes can be downloaded to smartphones for free. And so that can be, helpful even when you're doing like letter work and numbers and that type of thing. Looking at maybe using some noise canceling headphones for kids who are being obviously overstimulated by sound. Thinking about, again, if you're using, instrumental music, is it, soft and rhythmical, or is it loud and irregular? I think not all instrumental music is calming. And so thinking about really, what type of music you're playing, varying your instructions, and, also, if possible, including a visual cue with your instructions, because as you remember, auditory input is the very most difficult thing for our brains to process. And so if you can combine it with an additional cue, that can be sensory friendly. And then looking at ear dominance. So, all of us should be right ear dominant, so that the information goes from our right ear to the left side of the brain where our main language processing center is. And so, especially for those kids who are struggling with understanding auditory instructions, making sure that they are seated on the side of the classroom where their right ear is closer to where you're talking. There are like phonics phones and those types of things also to improve ear dominance and change ear dominance. So all things to consider. All right, so I have this QR code that, if you are a parent and this has been intriguing to you and you want more information, we do free screens for families. So you can scan this and sign up for a free screen. Leave that there. And then this is my email address. Sorry about the fact that it's all in capital letters. It's just how it was with the font. But it's EliseS@kineticEdgePT.com. And I'm going to just leave that up here while I answer questions from the group. One question I did get via email was about a sensory seeker. And had tried lots and lots of different things. Seems to be a seeker, I believe, more from the oral seeking standpoint. And so, continuing to find new and different things from an oral standpoint. I think the biggest thing I'd like you to take home is to realize that you don't need to always go to the sensory system that seems to be the preference for the child. So just because they're seeking orally, we have all of our other senses that we can also provide input to that can hopefully decrease the oral input. And so, realizing that movement strategies can be really helpful, tactile strategies, the deep pressure, heavy touch. So using all of our sensory systems to provide regulation, even if a child seems to gravitate toward one sensory system or the other. It is good to consider other sensory systems to assist with that regulation. So, all right, any questions from the group? Okay. What tips do you have for getting an avoider who is dysregulated re-engaged? Okay, so great question and always a challenge. So first of all, avoid talking. So if the avoider, let's say the avoider is having a meltdown or sitting under a desk, has, flown from the situation, don't begin talking to them, because verbal talking, auditory language, is the most stimulating sensory system. So as hard as it is as an adult, don't talk. And if you can, offer them something for their mouth. The mouth is going to be the most calming. Really think about what you would do if they were an infant, right? I, mentioned that earlier. So offer something for the mouth if you're able, and it's appropriate, giving a deep pressure, heavy hug, doing the figure eights if you can reach them. Provide more of the, humming or shh, that type of thing. Obviously their safety and the safety of others is a top priority concern. So getting them into a safe place, having the other students stay safe. I think, all of those things are going to be your first go-to, and realizing that it might take some time. All of us calm in different ways and in different lengths of time. So even though you feel like, okay, this has been long enough, can persevere, stick with it, and hopefully, you'll get them to that calm state of mind. And, I always tell parents, this doesn't mean that they're completely off the hook for their behavior, but reasoning and talking them through it in the middle of it is not the time. So, once they're regulated and re-engaged, then eventually you can maybe have a conversation about, we work on size of the problem, which is part of zones of regulation, look at those different things. Also, if that particular child has something that redirects them, providing that redirection tool can also be helpful. So, any other questions? All right, it is 10:27, so I have 3 more minutes. So I'm going to stay here, but for those of you who don't have questions or need to get going, thank you again for being here this morning. Thank you so much for all you do for the kids in your life. And yeah, I love collaborating with teachers and parents. It's one of my favorite things to do. So if you know that myself or another one of our OT team members is working with your students, please don't hesitate to reach out. And, if we can work together, hopefully, it's helpful for us to understand what are some of the things you're seeing in the classroom, because obviously those are different sometimes than what they're seeing at home. And so it can just be helpful for us, even when we're working with kids, to understand, like, okay, this might be happening at home, but whoa, this is what's happening at school. And so we love to hear from the educators in these kids' lives. So another question here. Will you share the presentation with us? I would love to show to our special ed teachers. Absolutely. I will confirm, but I'm quite certain that if you attended or signed up, that you will get a link to the presentation. So yeah, so absolutely, you will get it, and I would love for you to share it with others. So, and if you think that your school would like to have a presentation live and you're within a reasonable driving distance from me or one of our therapists, we also love to go into schools and do presentations there. So you can let me know about that as well. And thank you for the compliment, Laura. So